Hey guys, Dr. Epic here. Let's talk about the Angara. Were they a good or bad addition to Mass Effect? In other words, are they cool or lame? Major spoiler alerts for Mass Effect Andromeda will follow. First, thank you for clicking. But how do you determine if an entire species is cool or lame? We will look at their lore, how they're implemented in the game, and how they're presented in-game. As for their lore, we can start with their biology, which I must say right off the bat is fairly interesting and unique. They are warm-blooded biped animals with legs resembling the Quarian and Turian joint structure. So far, not something particularly new or innovative. Angaran physiology works in a rather peculiar way. They have an abnormally strong natural bioelectric field, which they can control very precisely, meaning they can interact with electronic technology in a quite unique way as far as other non-organics go. Furthermore, they seem to derive not only useful, but also necessary and vital energy from solar rays. If they are not exposed to enough sunlight, their immune system will suffer, and they can even straight up die from lack of sunlight. In darker situations, artificial UV lamps can suffice. This is reminiscent of the photosynthesis effect in earth and plant life, not usually seen in sapient animal life. Some Angara appear cold resistant and thriving on worlds like Vold better than on other warmer worlds. Next part of this review will touch on major spoilers immediately. You have been warned. Now what about Angaran history? Is that any cool? The biology seems cool and inspired enough, but let's hear about the story. The Angara were created artificially by the species known as the Jardaan.
Using Meridian, they designed a species that would live in this cluster. The Angara.
Little is known about the Jardaan or their reasons for creating the Angara. It seems that Havarl were the homeworld of the Angara, where the Jardaan seeded them, and from there, the Angara spread all across the Helios star cluster. After a while, the Scourge event sent the Angara back to pre-industrial times, leaving all Angara stranded on whichever planet they occupied at the time, separated from each other. After considerable time had passed, Angaran societies once again managed to reach for the stars and recreate an interstellar society. At this point, they reached the worlds now known as Kadara and Aya, to name a few. At this point, though, another calamity would punish the Angara, namely the arrival of the genocidal Ket Empire. The Ket were clever, dividing and then conquering, using means such as deception, diplomatic lies, as well as brute force to pit the Angara against each other, so they could much easier destroy their societies. It would become clear that the Ket would abduct Angarans to turn them into Ket on a literal genetic level. After a long time of being systematically oppressed and hunted down by Ket invaders, the Angaran resistance groups managed to gain some traction by unifying under the creative name of the Angaran Resistance. Other groups as well pose a more and more serious threat to aliens, like the Angaran Purist group known as Rokar. As of this day, the Angara are still engaged in existential conflict with the Ket. Now, I'll say the history of the Angara is cool enough, clearly heavily inspired from tales about how the conquistadors and such treated the native tribes and societies of the lands they visited.
Listen.
Cortez. My crew was as carefully chosen as the disciples of Christ, and I will not tolerate stowaways. You will be flogged.
It's cool to see it brought to life on a sci-fi scale, and it's fairly thought out how to implement this story in the Mass Effect universe, something that I appreciate. As for their culture, one can mention that the Angara are very emotional, open and explicit in their communication, though disease, for instance, for some reason, is regarded as a highly private matter. One should always sacrifice oneself for the greater good, be that family or species, if necessary. Angaran families are large, much like frogs on Earth, with several siblings being the norm. Angaran culture is varied due to them basically having evolved on multiple planets after the Scourge, and one of the core tenets of one of their most popular religions is reincarnation. It, interestingly enough, seems to be concrete evidence that Angarans undergo some sort of process, which, at the very least, is reminiscent of reincarnation. What I'm talking about are the so-called sages who appear to be able to remember facts and memories from previous lives way before their own birth. Some younger Angara identify as glory seekers, reminiscent of Norse faith and the fact that it is glorified to die in battle. These glory-seeking Angara believe that to die in battle is the greatest accomplishment and allows you to be reincarnated as an even stronger warrior. In times where all Angara know are war and struggle against the Ket, this faith is catching on, though shunned by some outspoken older believers. Angaran language is varied with over 200 different languages, with Shelesh being the most spoken common language, and a lot of special words without direct translation to Milky Way languages like Draulir or Vesagara. As for their societal governance, it is largely governed by democratic means, with the notable exception of military matters being handled by the Angaran resistance. Angaran technology is still fairly advanced, with them being able to craft very impressive small arms, for instance. I have to say that the Angaran culture is fairly thought out and goes fairly in depth, especially for only having appeared in one game. But let's be honest, it's pretty clear that the Angara were given a lot of focus by the dev team when creating new aliens, instead of creating several more aliens. So as far as lore goes though, I'll say the Angara are doing pretty well for themselves, even though a lot of their history might be called copycatting of actual history. I ultimately think the parallels are fun, just like how the Protheans resemble the Roman Empire in many ways. How are the Angaran implemented in the game though? They have strong relevance to the plot and serving as the face of friendly Andromeda species, something I think they pull off well. Though I wish there were more aliens, I'm at least glad BioWare managed to focus on one single species and flesh them out properly, instead of several uninteresting aliens. A lot of the times when you are introduced to a new faction or species, in this case, charismatic and good characters are important as representatives of the species to leave a good impression. Luckily for the Angara, they have just such exemplars like the intelligent Moshai, the gruff Ephra, and the curious and compelling Jal, the latter being perhaps the best squad mates in the entire Mass Effect Andromeda game. All of these strong characters give the Angara more cool guy points. In summation, I think the Angara come off pretty well. I've always personally had a good impression and experiences with them, and I really enjoyed learning about their history by speaking to wise sages at Havarl, or learning their history and culture by exploring ruins and finding stories. I think, despite Andromeda's troubles, the Angara aren't really a part of that, and is a solid addition to the Mass Effect mythos. Their connection to the Jardin make it interesting to see their role in the future, and it was a cool touch to see artificially created organic species for the first time, at least on this scale, in Mass Effect. And it was a nice flip on the synthetic, non-organic focus in the OG trilogy, as far as artificial species go. And I'll just come right out and say it, the Angara are cool. Do you disagree or agree? That's totally fine, you can keep it to yourself or let me know. Do you think the Angara will play any role in the future games? Let me know if you want to let me know. As for now though, I'm just be signing out as Dr. Epic, and I'll see you later, alligator. Yikes. This is reminiscent of the photosynthesis. This is reminiscent of the photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. This is reminiscent of the photosynthesis. This is reminiscent of the photosynthesis. Synthesis.